Welcome to English for Engineers. I'm your host, Olivia Augustin. Tune in as I dig deep into all things technical English, and international business communication to bring you a lifetime of knowledge in a digestible format. Hello, friends, fellow engineers, and the occasional word nerds who are listening in. Welcome to season 2 already. Who would have thought season 2 of the podcast? And to make it even more special, I have to tell you that this is a crossover episode that I'm doing together with Aimee Arsenault. She is the founder of Transmit Safety, a boutique health and safety consulting firm based out of Edmonton, Alberta, with a few noted acronyms behind her name. She has been working in health and safety for more than 15 years, gaining an in depth understanding of all the factors that influence occupational health and safety. And she has tons of experience in various sectors, but also in the construction industry. And that has provided her with a lot of insight into work environment dynamics and communication practices. So that's exactly the stuff you want to hear about. And if you want to know how we met, then you have to listen to the crossover episode on Amy's podcast called Transmit Safety because she was telling that story. Amy, great to have you.
I am honored that we have decided to do this crossover episode. I love communications. I really enjoy digging deep, as you said, into language, word choices. I am really passionate about culture and organizational behaviors and values. Word selection, word choices, the language that people use very much influences and shapes the shared values and belief systems of a group of people. So, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I'm excited. You're at the right place. Amy, how did you end up with so much love for language? How did you end up at occupational health and safety in the construction industry? How did that
I think
happen?
it I think it's a little bit of a two-folded question. I went to university with this master plan of getting a degree of some sort of kind and then getting an after degree in education. I then decided when I first went to university, my first semester was going to be up to me. I'm paying for my university. I don't really know what I want to specialize in. I used my first semester to dabble. I sat in my anthropology 101. I loved it. And I went, this is specifically for me. I love the shared value systems. I love figuring out why people do the things that they do. Rewind a little bit. I got my degree in cultural anthropology. I took a year off. I lived in Germany. In the university that I went to, you had to have a second language in order to graduate from the Faculty of Arts. I selected German, therefore, I went to live in Germany. Um, and then fast forward a little bit more than that, I came back to go back and get my after degree in education, but my time in Germany solidified the fact that I was not meant to be the classroom. I didn't have that the patience that I thought I was having working with children is a very definite skill set that I lacked. So I went back to the company that I kind of was working with all throughout university and said, "Hey, can I come back?" And they said, "Sure. Here is a position we have for you. It's covering somebody's mat leave," and it was in the accounting department. I came back, I arrived, and they went, "Oh, that person's not leaving for another 6 months." And in the meantime, you can just sit at reception, cover the reception desk. And nothing against receptionists and what they do is a very, dynamic skill set. I just wanted to be doing something else. I wanted to be doing something more. So I walked over into the health and safety manager's office and said, "You have that administration position open. That's me. I'm your person. I'll start tomorrow." And there was a little bit more nuancy to that hiring process. But once I got into health and safety, I realized the connection of my interest in culture, share values, share belief systems, and organizational behavior. the organizational values, and how that shapes decisions that are being made in the workplace,
Hmm.
how that shapes the person to person interactions, how that shapes what types of business the organization decides to bid on, and clients they want to work with. And from a language perspective, well, there's the linguistic side of things. How is a language shaped? How is a language formed? But more specifically in the workplace, the banging your head against the wall, why don't they listen? Or I've told them this 5 times. I just don't understand why they don't understand, is very much a communications challenge.
Oh, it is, yes.
And do we stop to pay attention to what those nuances are? That's what I like to talk about when it comes to
Oh, interesting.
communications in the workplace.
Interesting. When we discussed our crossover episode, we got started on so many topics. We were talking about navigating HSE tasks. So that's for the non-health safety engineers. HSE is health, safety, and environmental engineering, even though I think the E belongs into another career path. Anyhow, we're talking about that. We
Absolutely.
were, we were sorry, getting off topic again. We were talking about the significance of agency in pre-project planning because very often those guys come in later, which is a nightmare. We were talking about communication ethics. We were talking about engineering language versus safety language, about the importance of terminology, and even more topics that came to mind. And we could fill 5 podcasts, I guess. So if I had to pick one, um, and the one that I have, and that one triggered me the most because it sounds the least engineering, if I can use that word, and that was communications and ethics. And I can almost see the faces of some of my engineers like, oh, communications and ethics, what does that have to do with engineering? That is not numbers and not drawings and not drafts. So what's that? So could you explain to the listeners what is that all about, and why is that something engineers should concern themselves with?
There are certain designations within the health and safety profession that we have to align to and sign a code of ethics. So whether or not we're particular auditors, I hold a CRSP and a CHSC. I call it the alphabet soup behind my name. Every every code of ethics that I sign is me understanding what is on that code of ethics, but then also how do I communicate effectively and intentionally my code of ethics, why I do the things that I do and how I do the things that I do with my fellow coworkers, with the people that I'm interacting with, so that when I do have a potentially ethical decision or a difficult decision that is going to push me up against my ethical line, how do I say no? How do I hold my ethical line in the sand, but still maintain the relationship that I have with the group or the individual that I am interacting with in that potentially conflict situation? And so engineers sign code of ethics, and engineers have to be able to effectively communicate why you're doing the things that you're doing, how you're doing the things that you're doing them. And at times, because it is part of your code of ethics, because of that framework of how an engineer should be functioning.
Could you give us an example? Can you, or is it possible that you discuss maybe an example or a time when you had to navigate such a difficult ethical dilemma in your work as a health and safety consultant, just that we get a bit of a better picture what that means? Because I think that most of my Central European listeners with ethical, they think about something relating to the principles, to moral principles.
Mm. Very much so. And I think that so there's ethical principles which could be the utilitarian principle. So the ethical principle of doing the thing that is going to benefit the most amount of people or cause the least amount of harm for the most amount of people. There's the ethical principle of the individual right. People have individual rights. What is that? There's the duty ethical principle, and that there are so many different ethical principles. The a code of ethics that we as health and safety practitioners and professionals have to align to, whether or not it's a train the trainer code of ethics, it is an auditor code of ethics, it is a professional designation code of ethics, is based on, I think, the duty based principle, as well as the utilitarian ethical principle, as well as the individual. So I think it's a summary of different variations of ethical principles and how we are going to apply them. As an example, I have within my one code of ethics have to act with integrity. What does that
Okay.
look like? What does that, how do you apply integrity within your work scope? I have to recognize my professional boundaries. I have to recognize my competencies and be able to say that is outside of my competency. And competency is a combination of qualifications, training, and experience. So if I'm asked to do something that is outside of my competency, I need to say no. I
Mm-hmm.
cannot do that, and this is why. An example that comes to mind is I have always made it very intentionally um, a, a career decision. I never want to work in a place where if an alarm goes off, I die. So I've stayed away from confined spaces. I've stayed away from working within certain workplace environments. And I had a client come and ask me if I was willing to create a confined space entry program. So a working in confined space program for that company. Do I know about confined space? Yes. How do I have a confined space ticket? I did, but I let it expire so I could say that I no longer have that training. Did I feel competent in creating that? No. And I had to turn that work away. And you might be, your listeners, your engineers might be asked to do something that is outside of their competency, outside of what they have been qualified, trained, and have experience doing. And how do you navigate that conversation of saying no and this is why, or I have to align with my code of conduct and I can't do that. And there could be multiple different situations. As a trainer, I've been asked to expedite the amount of time it would take to get training completed. So the orientation is planned for 4 hours. We need that worker in the field. Can you do it in 20 minutes? No. But
Clear no. Yeah.
clear no, but the project manager is there going, get it done, get it done, get it done. And how do you balance that in a way? How do you communicate in a way that doesn't burn the bridge between you and that project manager, that recognizes the production kind of time frame that you could be holding up, but still saying, you know what, I have these ethics that I have to align myself to, and if I go beyond that, well, next week you're going to ask me to push the line even further, and the week after that, that I'm willing, I have a little bit of wiggle room for here, and now that is a more difficult way that you have to move forward with that project, with that company, and word gets out professionally. Aimee's willing to move the line. You don't want that associated with your name. You don't want
Mm-hmm.
to be associated with stepping over that code of conduct line, that code of ethics line. But you also want to be considered a team player. You want to be considered part of the solution. You want to help get the job done. So communication for me is, how do you navigate those conversations? How do you be confident in what you need to communicate? What do you want people to know about that importance? And I'm rambling a little bit.
Oh, no, no, no.
Yeah, I was just going to say, for me, communications is just how do you interact with the people that you're working with? Because communications is more than just words. It's communications is body language, it's tone, it's hands. I'm talking with my hands. It's hand signals. It's so much more complex than just word choice at times.
True. You used an interesting word earlier. You said that ethical line, it's about integrity. And I wonder, is the definition of integrity, does that differ from region to region where you work? Is integrity something different in North America than in Central Europe than in Asia?
For me, integrity means being honest and holding your line, or having kind of that strong moral principle. But morals are and can be very individually based at times. Morals
Mhm.
can be culturally based, regionally based. So, can integrity vary? I think so. Or the definition of integrity vary? I think so. When we think about how you put integrity moving forward, I think for me personally, it's being trustworthy, being kind, being clear in what I'm trying to communicate, being consistent in what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. But can integrity, the definition change? I think absolutely.
Mhm.
That's English in its nuances. English is very dynamic, and the language of English, um,
It changes by definition.
absolutely. English is an always, I think all languages are always evolving and changing. And definitions mean different things to different people depending on which dictionary they pulled off the shelf.
Yeah, quite true. Do you have a quick tip for young health and safety practitioners, health and safety engineers, who just start out in the field, how to draw that line, how to be assertive, drawing the line, what is ethical, what is integrity to them, without being not being a team player?
I think for me, being assertive is just staying strong with what you need to get done.
Mhm.
And how do you do that? Really is through being clear and concise in your communication. And we talked about clear as kind, or you
Oh,
mentioned clear
yes.
as kind in our in the Transmit Safety podcast. So I'm going to bring it back into this one, because if you don't communicate what you're doing and how you're doing it, and why, more importantly, why you're doing it, there is a potential for misunderstanding. There is the potential for conflict, unintended conflict based on your actions. And whenever I'm talking to other health and safety practitioners or professionals, if you find that you're constantly in an organization being challenged by your ethics and you're constantly being asked to move that line in the sand, to me, that's a red flag on the organizational values. To me, that is potentially an organization that you don't want to stay in,
Oh,
because you are always going to have to challenge your line, hold that line in the sand, or stand on the top of the hill, whatever
yeah, and you're
phrase you want to
fighting
use.
to hold your lines instead of working with the team.
Yeah, and it's
Mm.
exhausting. It is emotionally draining. You are not potentially going to be building the types of positive relationships to move forward. Or on the other side of things, you're just going to give in and say yes to something that maybe you shouldn't have said yes to. And now all of a sudden, it's a slippery slope.
Yeah. And as a health and safety practitioner, slippery slopes are not safe, even with safety shoes. That's a very dangerous place to be on. Yeah.
Yeah, and you don't want to be challenged for that. And there are still organizations out there that are not safe. There are organizations out there that are not putting their workers' health and safety at the forefront of their decisions. And I think for us as people, we need to start challenging back and challenging to say, are these even the right companies that I want to work for
Yeah.
and buy from? To me,
Yes. Oh,
I
oh,
shop my
yes.
ethics, I shop my
I know that
values.
about you. Yeah.
And eventually these organizations will learn that people don't want to work for organizations that are not what I consider, acting with integrity and acting with the health and safety of their workers at the forefront of their mindset.
Hmm.
And from an engineering perspective, like for the engineers who are listening, you have more impact to health and safety than I think you do.
Yes. Oh, absolute yes. Absolute yes. I'm. I don't know if I can just something came into mind, but I remembered when I was at a tech college engineering school, we even learned with if you're building a tunnel, there is an average amount of casualties per kilometer. I mean, how crazy! Now thinking back, I mean, I was a teenager. I was like, oh wow, shocker, went on with my day. But now thinking back, I'm like, how how do you value life if you talk about that so easily in a class? Oh yeah, by the way, there is this amount of casualties are deadly per kilometer of building a new tunnel. I'm like, why can't we build slower? Can we build more careful? Why can't we as humans not value life higher? That is
That's
what
just the way
goes
that we
back
do
to.
the work here, and that's the way that the work is done, and that's the way it's always been done.
Eh, yeah.
Yeah, but let's challenge that conversation. And I think
Yes,
engineers
absolutely.
are in a very key point to challenge the design, right? So safety by design, safety by engineering is so important and can make a huge impact not only for the end user, but when we talk about the engineer, the design of a product, of a building, of a structure, whatever it is, not only for the end user, for the public user, but are you thinking about the worker in the installation of that? Are you thinking about the worker when they have to go in and do the maintenance of
Hmm.
that? I have looked at certain pieces of equipment and going, okay, well, the worker and I are looking at it and they're looking at me and I'm looking at them and they're looking at me and I'm looking at them and I'm going, I don't know what the engineer was thinking. Right?
Yeah, it's
Because
not safe.
there's no way that you can stick your hand in that
Hmm.
position and or get your body into that position ergonomically. It's going to be more work or more effort. We have to dismantle a lot more. And so from an engineer by a safety by design standpoint, listeners, think about think about the installation, think about the maintenance, and then also think about the end user
Yeah.
interaction of your product or of your um, um, grasping
Whatever
at
you're making.
whatever you're engineering, yeah, whatever you're
Yeah.
making.
Safety by design. I like that. That's a great phrase. No, it should be more than a phrase. And I just thought safety standards are like language are changing. Just think back of that very famous photos of those steel workers having lunch when they, that the big steel beam and they're just sitting on the beam without any security. The old black and white picture from what did they build? The Chrysler building or
Something, yeah,
some
building in New York.
big building in New York. It's like 100 years old. And how much has changed? How much has changed since I started my first engineering job? I remember, oh, my favorite foreman. He was walking around in sandals on the building site all day long because he had. I have to look up that word because that's a medical word that I don't know. He was suffering from gout and he couldn't
Oh,
fit any closed shoes. So he had his open sandals on the building site. And then when I mentioned it the first time, it was like, oh, I have to go. And then the other times when we were a great team, but then over years when I came on the building site, I did hear the others shout, "Olivia's coming! Put on your put on the other shoes." But yeah, it so much changed in the last 20 years. Even when I did my first internship, there was still beer on the building site. So that would be such. I mean, think of that, having alcohol on a building site now. I mean, that's crazy.
yeah. To
It's
me, I'm
crazy.
thinking like,
It's like
there's
you're
probably
speechless.
still it's probably still at the building sites, but now it's talked about more. Yeah, now I now well there's impairment testing and it's gotten to a whole nother level, but it's
Yeah.
when we think about that supervisor as an example, if you are in any type of leadership position, which I think engineers for the most part are considered in leadership positions, project managers, or even in a position of authority, you're directing the work, how the work is done. You're writing installation procedures. You're
You're setting an
create.
example.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you need to set the example, and so for that supervisor, he set the example of it's okay not to follow the safety protocols, the safety standards, because people listen to what you say, but more importantly, they watch what you do.
Yeah.
And that's an important part of communication is we say, are you walking the walk, talking the talk?
We were talking about ethical language, safety language, even safety body language. But there is a difference between safety language and engineering language that you mentioned. What's that about?
I think when we think about when you're reading policies, practices, and procedures,
Hmm.
and you're taking a look at the word choice or selection choice that who's ever writing the body of the document, you can tell, for me anyway, I can tell where their vocational training comes from, where their professional training comes from, and what their go to direction style is. And when we look at engineering language or safety language, we talked a little bit about this in
We
our
did.
crossover
We did.
podcast, is that there is no kind of engineer talk or safety talk. There is though particular word choice selections and how instructions are written more so. So I find that engineer documents are very much directive documents, procedural type of documentation.
Manuals. Do this,
Manual,
do
yeah,
that.
absolutely. Read this diagram, step one, step two, step three, very much directional type of documentation. Where safety documentation can be a little bit of both. There's policies that talk about the warm and the feelings of the writing of the commitment to health and safety and why we do the things that we do. Safety language also kind of includes the psychological health and safety side of things. And so it's not just about the widget is moving or what widget needs to go into what place. Um, Safety language can include the emotion side of things as well. Where I'm reading an engineer document, step one, step two, step three, step four, sometimes safety documentation includes the what are the workers feeling when they get to this point, or what might the workers be
Hmm.
thinking about, especially when we're designing training, when we are creating safety meeting minutes. How might the workers or the people attending this meeting emotionally react to this content, to this message? How do you
Could you
respond to
just
that?
add? Could you maybe just explain why is that important? I know I have an idea why it is important, but what would you say if you're coming to a company, you're doing the audits that you do, and you tell one of the engineers, we have to make sure to know what the engineers are feeling that are coming into the training. I can almost see the look at their faces. So what do you tell them why that is important?
When you are getting feedback from anything that you do, a training, a presentation, an email that you send out, you need to realize that people are people and people are people. I don't know how to say that in any other way, and we have emotions. We have emotions, we have thoughts, we have feelings. And if there is going to be happy feelings, sad feelings, neutral feelings, that's fine. if you are trying to get a behavior change, a decision that's being made, if you are trying to influence other people, you're trying to get them to say yes to your design or go with this particular product that you think is the
Wear
best.
the gloves, wear the hat, wear the safety shoes, whatever.
Whatever it is, you need to dig into the why they are doing the things that they are doing. And part of that is the emotional connection to whatever it is that you're trying to communicate with them. And also from that communication side of things, the different terminology that people are used to. And I've gone from region to region in the same company, and the language, the communication has been completely different,
Hmm.
which is very kind of interesting.
Does it, if you say the language has changed from region to region, even if it's the same mother company, um, is it because the so no, I'm it's on the tip of my tongue that word. Is it because the vibe in the company is different?
I would say that even within an organization, from project to project, from region to region, communication styles changes, word selection changes because of the people who are at that project. It is the people who are on those job sites, and each project, each organization, each region, each interaction that you're having with somebody is creating that, what I call that culture. I might have the same procedure in front of me. And I can take my laptop and go from project A to project B. I could take my laptop and go to from project B to project C. And I know the work steps that I need to do. But how I do them and how I communicate what I do, how I do, why I'm doing it might need to fluctuate, might need to pivot depending on who's sitting around me, who's in that coffee, who's in the lunchroom, who am I having coffee with. You need to know who you are working with to figure out that nuance. Or here in Canada, we say to figure out that je ne sais quoi
Oh yeah,
aspect.
the je ne sais quoi, the aspect. Yeah, that is such good advice. And I heard, I think it's the same advice, just in different words. But someone once told me, if it's not against the company principles, it's if it's not against that set of rules that the company has laid down, just go with the cultural flow. Just adapt to the new
Mhm.
culture, the new country, as long as it's not against the basic principles of the company. Because
Yeah,
every
you have.
culture adapts the same rule differently.
And that, I think, is linking all the way back to our code of ethics as professionals. Our code of ethics give us that framework, but how you navigate that framework will need to change depending on who you're working with. And that's the same thing as, I will do so much unless it's in violation of a legislation. I will do so much unless it's in non-compliance with the company policy, rule, procedure. I will do so much unless it's um, in conflict with my code of conduct. The way that I kind of explain it in conversation with people is that the rules, the policies, the procedures, the legislation, your code of ethics, those are the boundaries. But how you decide to put the ball in the net, the puck in the net, the ball in the hole, the ball in the hoop, however you decide to get the goal, whatever terminology, whatever. Here's the thing. Whatever sport that country is most popular with, or whichever sport that work group most likely watches, that is the sport analogy that I will use. But however you decide to do that is up to you, depending on the players, depending on their skill set, depending on the coach that you have, depending on all of these different factors. And it's up for us to figure out what those factors are.
Yeah. One last question. Imagine a young health safety specialist, not only maybe the second job, just switching companies, coming into a complete new environment, similar codes of conduct, similar, the same legislation they're under, complete different work culture. What tip would you have for them? How to integrate without losing your ethical line in the sand?
Whenever I'm starting a new organization, whenever I'm going in as a consultant, or to get to know kind of a new group of people, I always watch. And I think that that links back into my anthropology kind of training in terms of doing some observations, paying attention to how people interact with each other. What is the norm? What is the norm for that group of people in how they greet each other in the morning? What is the norm for how they decide to make coffee in the morning or make coffee in the lunchroom? What is the norm for the way that people send invitations to meetings? What is the norm for expectation for time that it takes for people to interact with each other? I really sit back and I observe. And even in terms of attending meetings, who has authority in the organization isn't always who's at the top of the org chart. And if I want to make a really impactful, key kind of initial relationship, I pay attention to who do people look at when meetings are occurring. Are they looking at the speaker? Are they looking at somebody else to see what their body cues are? When people speak up and they're interacting, who are they body cue telling you they feel is important? Who are they looking at? Who are they leaning forward to? If somebody nods in a meeting first, how many other people automatically nod with them or not, or go, no? So, whenever I'm starting a new company, whenever I'm meeting a new group of people, whenever I'm trying to figure out who to interact with, I pay attention. I'm making notes. Who has influence? Who has what we call referent power? And referent power is trust. Power built by trust, power built by respect. I'm
By
paying attention
integrity.
to Exactly. I'm paying attention to what is the actual structure of this organization. Is this an autocratic type of leadership? Is this a more laissez-faire type of organization? Because I work very well in certain types of leadership positions. And if you want to be successful, you need to figure out what that type of leadership structure is within the organization. You're going to figure it out when you hit some what I
Yes.
call roadblocks, or when you step on certain what I call landmines and you're like, "Ooh, didn't know that was under that that conversational note there." You're There are certain ways that you can figure it out unintentionally by somebody saying you cross the line here, or that's not how we do things here, or you can do it a little bit more intentionally by observing how people are interacting with each other. So
Very
my number
interesting.
one tip: sit back, listen to understand, and observe. Yeah.
Very, very sound advice. And if you think now, oh, I need Aimee's experience in my professional life, you can find her on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on Twitter. I highly, 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 and did I already say highly recommend listen to her Transmit Safety podcast, which is full of gold nuggets, and I'm an addict already. Or subscribe to her newsletter, and all those things are linked through her website, transmitsafety.com. And as always, you will find all the links at the end of this podcast description as well. That was it. This was English for Engineers Season 2, Episode 1. As we come to the end of this episode, I want to mention again that this is a crossover because Aimee and I talked and recorded even more. And the other part of our conversation is available on Aimee's podcast called Transmit Safety, and you can listen to it on Spotify as well. I'm your host, Olivia Augustin. Talk to you soon.